Go. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest BCS Publishing Author Webinars
Mm.
Series 2025. I'm Ian Borthwick. I'm Head of Publishing at BCS, and I'll be hosting today's event, and I'll be managing the chat and the Q&A. So please do ask any questions that come up as you go along. It's great to have questions for the Q&A session, which we'll be holding towards the end of the webinar. I've got a few questions prepared, but I very much welcome any other questions that you've got today. So this session will be recorded as well. It is being recorded right now. And we will be posting that online shortly. We've got a playlist of all the previous author webinars, which is being created at the moment. So that's going to be there for your watching at your own leisure. Today's webinar is on data safety, which is obviously a subset of data governance. We've been joined by Alison Holt and Neil Calvert. So Alison is a BCS author, long-standing. She's authored The Governance of IT, as well as Data Governance, and more recently wrote a BCS Library exclusive on data safe. And that's going to be the focus for today's webinar. But we're also going to be obviously we've got two data governance experts on the line. So if you have any other questions, that would be great to see. This webinar series, as you may know, has been running since about the beginning of the year. We've covered a lot of different topics from AI and business analysis to cybersecurity. We have some more coming up in July, and then we're taking a break in August. We'll be restarting in September. But we have business architecture coming up, cyber and business analysis, data science foundations in July, and then in September we'll be restarting with some more around AI and digital solutions. So please do watch out for that, and I'll post a link to the series in the chat. I will also be posting a link to the BCS library in the chat as to where you can look to get subscriptions. There are exclusive subscriptions to BCS members, but we also make available subscriptions to different corporates based on their own needs. So I think without further ado, I will pass it over to Alison.
Thank you, Ian. And if you're sitting comfortably, well, we'll get going. So first of all, thank you to the BCS publishing team for inviting me to present a webinar on my book, Data Safe. And I'm delighted to be joined by my esteemed colleague and fellow IT professional, Brit/New Zealander, Neil Calvert, who is the CEO of an expanding company, Link, that supports successful change management. So Neil and I are currently working together using Link software to build a digital twin of the judiciary of Papua New Guinea. And when we've completed it, we'll be able to model the effect of adding judges, courtrooms, court ushers, etc. to the current setup to find out where our bottlenecks are. And it will be an invaluable planning tool for the PNG judiciary. So that's just by way of introduction to let you know how Neil and I are connected. So back to Data Safe. My aim in writing this short book, Data Safe, was to create a book of punchy advice for busy, time-poor IT professionals. The book distills the big list of all the things you could do to keep data safe into essentials and takes a reality check on some of the expectations we have of our users and customers. So as the Heathrow Airport substation fire proved in March, the world is heavily dependent on data systems to operate, and a few hours of downtime of a key organisation can lead to huge costs and days of recovery. Working in Papua New Guinea, I've witnessed several manual check-ins at Port Moresby Jackson International Airport when the electronic systems have been down due to a power cut, and the manual check-in is quite a process. To be fair, we don't have quite as much traffic as London Heathrow, and the power is off regularly enough for the manual process to be well known. But the point is, a cyber attack wouldn't just render our data temporarily unobtainable, it could also destroy or manipulate or release our data, resulting in costs, lost business during recovery times, reputation loss, etc., etc. Some organisations never recover from such an event. So the aim of DataSafe is to help you ensure that your data is available when you need it. So let's get started. So we're going to talk about 5 practices you should consider for keeping you safe and also your family, customers, friends, and colleagues' data safe. The 5 practices explored in the book Data Safe are: 1, hire a very brave security manager; 2, educate your customers and users; 3, choose trustworthy service providers; 4, embrace great data practices; and 5, think like an ethical hacker and be prepared. As I was writing the book, I reminded myself of some of the practices I should be practicing. So there's something here for everyone. So let's start with hiring a brave security manager. So next slide. Thank you, Ian. The role of a security manager is a warrior or superhero role. You need somebody who can be fully alert and vigilant and ready to act at short notice, and bold enough and trusted enough to act first and explain afterwards if that's what's required. The warriors generally aren't the type to attend meetings regularly, and they might not contribute much to the wider management of the organisation or the development of the corporate culture. They might not even keep the regular hours of the rest of the employees, but when they say they need to meet with you, drop everything and go, and listen carefully. Don't waste any time reminding them that they never attend team meetings. So we saw an interesting example in an organisation a few years ago. An administrator of one of the legacy case management systems hosted on site failed to renew a server license, and the firewall refused to allow traffic to pass. The administrator made a plea for an exception on the firewall, and the network manager sent a firm "no way" message in response. Everything escalated, and ironically, the network manager was threatened with court action, but he didn't waver. He had witnessed a malware attack that took out service for months, and he wasn't going to be caught again. The administrator of the case management system knew that preventing access to his case management system would bring work to a halt. It was a sticky situation. The case management team demanded a face-to-face discussion before access could be banned, and the network team countered that demanding a discussion would be equivalent to seeing their offices on fire and requesting a meeting to decide whether to call the fire brigade. The situation got very tense and fiery, but eventually the case management administrator sorted out his licensing issue and normal service resumed for all. So the question here is, how brave is the person guarding your network? And what extremes would your users and customers go to if they were denied access to a service? Do you have organizational protocols and business continuity measures in place to sail through these awkward scenarios? So next slide, please, Ian. So data safe practice number 2 is educate your customers and users. So I picked this slide because it has all the icons that refer to different parts of cybersecurity, but there's some here that I'm not entirely sure about. So several of them I know, but the bottom line of instructions to me look like washing instructions, and rather than cybersecurity icons. So yes, so all this to say it's a confusing environment. So how do we help our customers and users through it? So I was traveling last year, and whilst waiting in an airport queue, heard the story of a woman arriving at an Australian airport carrying in one hand her arrival card, neatly filled out with nothing to declare. In the other hand, she was carrying a massive pineapple, despite having ticked the box on the form to say that she wasn't carrying fruit. She hadn't made the connection between the pineapple and fruit and the declaration. And when confronted, she pointed out that the declaration didn't mention pineapples. Our IT security and safety questions suffer the same fate of misinterpretation. We overwhelm our users and customers with questions. We use jargon that isn't in common usage or just not recognizable to our audience. We demand complications of passwords and multi-factor IDs, and much of this seems irrelevant or not applicable to me. So there are many things we wish our users and customers would do, but we need to be realistic. Better to pick the 2 to 3 practices that would make the most difference to your organisation and adjust the service at your end to allow for the issues arising from the many data hygiene practices you suspect they won't be following. Make these 2 to 3 practices mandatory for access to your systems and explain them in plain and simple language with translations as required. So my current pick of best practices would be, and just a quick comment here, I think this changes all the time, but this is my current pick of 2 practices would be: number 1, choose a strong password, and 2, be watchful for links, messages, emails that don't look quite right, authentic, and pause before you click. You'll have seen the paypal.com example where the one of the L in PayPal is replaced with a 1. And if you're in a hurry to make a payment, you might just not notice the difference. So I think those are the 2 picks for me at the moment for data safe practices, and Neil might have something to add at the end. So next slide, please. Slide number 3. Choose trustworthy service providers. As an IT professional, you will be assessed on the quality of the delivery of your services and solutions, and on the quality and ethical standards of your delivery partners. Look for providers and partners who can demonstrate good data stewardship practices. I recommend that you look for compliance to the ISO, International Standards Organization, standards for service management, ISO standard 20,000, and security management, ISO standard 27,000 as a bare minimum here. I live in an apartment in a hotel in Papua New Guinea, and every month I receive an invoice for extras. So these are purchases that are made from any of the hotel outlets that I've made using my hotel account number. So one month I received an invoice relating to another resident's purchases, and though it was very interesting to see just how much drinking and dry cleaning one of my fellow residents was doing, it concerned me that the billing system couldn't match people, purchases, hotel account number, apartment number. I spoke to the hotel accounts team and the matter was sorted out instantly, and with much apologising. I was issued a new hotel account number, ensured there would be great care taken to ensure that the problem didn't recur. But we see an increasing number of data breaches from companies with household names where personal data has been on-sold, leaked, lost, left on a train, or just sent to the wrong place. And there's often a no harm done statement from the CEO explaining that there was no financial loss to customers, but the organisation itself has suffered a reputational loss. The effects of that loss might not be immediately obvious, but customers will think twice before renewing services. So the moral here is bad things will happen. It's how your service partners and providers respond that will make a difference to your customer base. Don't be tempted to make decisions based on cost alone and to automatically select the cheapest service provider or delivery partner, because if it turns out that they are saving money by not having good standards in place, they might end up costing you your organisation. So next slide, please. So that brings us to practice number 4. I'm sorry, this is a dreadful pun. This is about embracing the great data practices, which in the book I've labelled as 7 C's. So this is a picture of the 7 C's. Don't listen to the people who tell you not to sweat the small stuff. With data, you really do need to sweat the small stuff and look at your practices in great detail. There are several practices you need to embrace. I was sitting in a cafe called the 7 C's when I was writing the first manuscript for the book Data Safe. In the book, I've used the 7 C's mnemonic to help with memorising them, and hopefully now, every time you look at a map of the world and see the 7 C's, it would be a reminder to clean up your data. So let's look at the first and the second C together: collect and curate. Most organisations can divide their data collection into 3 broad categories. There's your back office or corporate services data, there's your data relating to your products and services, and then there's your customer data. This is a great time to step back and check that you're collecting the data that you need and not under or over collecting. Are there new data sources available that you haven't yet considered? Perhaps they weren't even around last time you went through this process. Does your data practice for data collection align with your evolving organisation vision and mission? Does your data collection reflect who you say you are? For example, if you say that you care for the environment, Does your data practice underpin this? So the third C, classify. Are the correct permissions in place to ensure that everybody can see the data they need for their role and not see the data that they don't need? Are data permissions being updated as people move through different roles in your organisation? Do you have metadata tags in place to help pull out categories of data as and when required? Are the metadata labels relevant and useful? Are you classifying PII, your personal identifiable information, correctly? PII is the nuclear waste of data and needs to be handled with great care and caution. So the fourth C is clean. How clean is your data? Do you have duplications, out-of-date data? Do you keep data of customers in the production system after they've died? It wasn't unusual years ago for an insurance company in my hometown of the UK to send out reminders for life insurance payments to people who had died, even though the same system had been used to pay out the life insurance to the widower. Does the state of your data reflect accurately the status of your customers? So the fifth C, clear. Storage is cheap. And we just end up saving everything, irrespective of whether it has any value. And personally, I do that all the time. So this is talking to myself now. Suggestion here is to remove the data that isn't useful and won't ever be useful, including after a consideration of compliance purposes, and to archive what isn't useful today, but might have some future use, or isn't useful, but is required to be kept for compliance purposes. So the sixth C is communicate. Nobody sees an email with a subject line, data policy, coming into their inbox and dances for joy. Most people won't read it, or they will put it aside for when they are less busy, which is code for never. You will need to be creative with your launch of new data policies. If you decide to take a stick rather than a carrot approach, allow plenty of time for your staff to become compliant with the policy before you start to introduce penalties for non-compliance. Induction into the organisation is generally the best time to hit people with policy, though even that can go wrong if take a day to familiarise yourself with the organisational policies becomes synonymous with, why don't you take a day off? I was working in an organisation with a team that was implementing new data policy as part of a rollout of a new finance system. We tried so many different ways of communicating to all staff through staff meetings, team meetings, company newsletters, emails, etc., etc. In the end, in absolute desperation, we developed a poster describing new policies and we attached it to the back of toilet doors. Within a week, we had reached our audience. And that brings us to the seventh C, check. It's all very well having these defined practices in place, but you need to check regularly for compliance through random audits. I can guarantee you that you will receive pushback from somebody if you propose a data or IT audit. The conscientious will want you to wait until everything is sorted, which will be never again. The less conscientious will be concerned about being found to be underperforming and will demonstrate avoidance tactics. The positively unscrupulous staff who are running their private business through your data systems will run a distraction tactic. All I can say here is good luck with overcoming the pushbacks. Becoming data safe cannot be achieved by embracing these 7 Cs alone. With everybody working from anywhere, using anything from a standard laptop to data-enabled glasses or internet-connected smart clothing, look at your endpoint security and put zero trust software in place to protect at the first point of entry to your organisation. Reject the pushbacks and run regular and sporadic data audits to check for compliance with the practices and assist with data clean and data clear policies. So next slide, please, Ian. That brings us to our fifth and final data safe practice. Think like an ethical hacker. As an IT professional, the idea of thinking like a hacker feels wrong, but you don't actually need to join the dark side to check for vulnerabilities and chinks in the organization's cybersecurity protection. Learn how to look for weaknesses from the outside of your organization or hire a certified ethical hacker to look for you. There are some great podcasts featuring cybersecurity professionals telling stories to give you an idea of worst case scenarios. and things to look for. And unless you are going to fully disconnect from the internet, you're going to be vulnerable to cyber attack. However many great policies, practices, and tools you have deployed, new cyber threats arise continually. So since the cyber attack is more when than if, let's consider how you can ensure a quick and full recovery after a bad event. Firstly, make sure you have copies of your data backed up in different services, locations, and in a way that can be easily retrieved. Check that an attack to your production system data couldn't result in data in your backup systems being overwritten with bad data. Secondly, take special treatment of your mission critical data. And finally, be ready to set up business on a new platform. Practice your data recovery skills regularly and involve your network security and cybersecurity teams to complete these exercises. So we've talked about the theory, and now it's time to talk about the reality. So next slide, please, Ian. So as we said earlier, Neil's the founder and CEO of Link, and as CEO and manager of everything, he has a very good idea of the whole data safe arena. So Neil, please can you tell us about Link, your role, and tell us a bit about the rapid growth you're currently experiencing and how that's affected your thoughts on keeping data safe.
No, thanks, Alison. Good afternoon, everyone. It's actually almost tomorrow here in New Zealand. So you can go to bed tonight knowing that tomorrow does arrive, which is always a good thing because we're in the future. So yes, my name's Neil. I'm the founder, chief exec of Link. We are a digital twin of the organization platform. So we're a software that's cloud native. We help organizations understand the impact of change prior to implementing that change. So we're a cross between business process modeling, data architecture, enterprise architecture. We deliver data that helps support knowledge about return on investment for that change inside the organizations. We run out of just Pororua, which is just north of Wellington on North Island of New Zealand, but we have customers and partners obviously here in New Zealand, Australia, the United States, the Middle East, and Europe. And as I said, we run effectively a software as a service platform, so we're highly reliant on the internet, which means that we're at risk. So what is data? Where to start with the data safe thing? I guess our story started knowing that we needed to design security into the platform from the very outset. So I think you do it security by design. It's not something today that you can build a platform and then at some point go, oh, hold on a second, we ought to be thinking about security and engineer it in later. It has to be one of those principles that you base your entire development upon from the outset, as in the same way that you would say, oh, we're going to become global, because that mindset ensures that you are thinking about how people are going to use your platform, the data that they are going to store inside that platform, how they access it, and how other people might want to access it. So it's it becomes kind of everything to you very, very quickly. You know, this is it safe, and then everything cascades from there. You talked about PII, so are we capturing and storing personal information? If we are, why? GDPR came along and forced everybody to think about legitimate purpose of storing personal information. So suddenly you find your headspace there. Are we legitimately storing content that people are making use of, that we are making use of? Do we have permission to store it? Is it stored appropriately, etc., etc.? So the guiding principle for us was security by design.
So Neil, do you have a brave security manager? Do you have somebody who's championing the security of your data?
Yeah, absolutely, but he's our product owner, and so I think this is slightly different. I know I'm the owner of a software company, and that's a bit different than being the chief exec of a government agency or a large private organization that is that's not that might be producing goods and selling goods. So my perspective is we owe it to our customers for them to have the trust in our platform that their data is secure. And so my product manager is the person who has the responsibility to ensure that the platform is secure, and therefore he becomes that brave security manager.
The
The funny thing about this is in my early career, I worked for Ordnance Survey in Southampton, the National Mapping Agency. I am British by birth, been in New Zealand for 16 years. We used to joke about the security guy being someone in IT that knew a little bit and so got promoted. And are promoted into this position of suddenly having the power of everything in their hands. And today, I think you have to be really careful that the role isn't something that you can kind of play around at. And for an organization that is getting into this space, I would 100% be looking externally to where the experts are, because you can spend a lot of time training an individual inside an organization to perform an activity once, say a migration from on-premise content to moving into the cloud. There's a lot of work to learn how to do that, to understand the patterns to deploy, to then do the work. You do that once.
It's a win-off.
As opposed to going and saying, well, this infrastructure provider can do that for me as a service, and you effectively outsource that brave champion because that's their job. And you are paying for the infrastructure and the tools around the infrastructure to provide that service for you. And that's effectively what we have done. We have a highly capable individual that is making use of best practice infrastructure that is available today, because whether you pick Azure or AWS or some other cloud provider, they will have to have tools that you can take advantage of to make this significantly easier than it has been, and that also comes with risks. So,
Neil, I think we have to say here other cloud providers are available.
Other cloud providers are. There are many. There are many of them. But I would say with the vast number of them that are out there, you do have to understand the suite of capability that they can provide. Anyone could actually put a disk and connect it to the internet and say they're a hosting provider. You want to really look for an organization with a capability that includes and as a priority is talking about how you secure your environment.
Which comes down to the standards, the ISO standards, and other ways of actually measuring how capable your providers are. Can you tell us a bit about educating your customers and users, and how you try and corral them into good data hygiene practices?
Yes. So to some degree, we don't care. We're providing a piece of software that an organization can use, and what they put into the platform is up to them, and they should have governance supported by the software. That means that they understand what they're capturing and what that means. But in reality, there are some things you can do to influence them. So the first is the user experience that you provide. You make it very easy for them to do the right thing, and less easy to do the wrong thing. And so that's a user experience and user interface design challenge that you force them down the pathway that means they're doing things right. So that includes things like strength of password, and moving towards passwordless, so using tokens and Windows Hello and things like that. So integrating into platforms that make it much harder for somebody else to gain access. So there's that design side. The other thing that we found, pricing. Pricing can steer the user to think about the content that they have, and does have them tidy things up. So get rid of backups that are out of date. Ensure that the content is appropriate. Maybe put a policy in place around retention of information. Is it still valuable for me to have this, because if it costs you to store it,
Yes.
then you will do things in terms of tidying up your data. You made a comment that storage is cheap, and to some degree, I'd push back on that. There is a misconception that storage is cheap in the cloud, but it can very, very quickly become the most expensive part of your infrastructure if you keep everything forever. In fact, it just grows linearly over time, and you have to have good policy around data destruction, according to whatever legislative requirement you might have for keeping data for 7 years. But without those policies and without considering how the organization works, if you are just storing everything in the cloud, your business can end up with quite a hefty bill. So we expose that to our users within the platform, so they're completely transparent about what's costing them money, and then they're able to put policies in place to manage that.
So by putting your pricing aligned to data volume, you're kind of encouraging good practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And we're seeing that it's working, because people are tidying up after themselves, which is actually quite rare to see. If your email inbox is anything like mine, I think I've got every email that I've ever sent or received for the whole of my career in PST files and things like that. And that's because on a personal level, paying for some storage on a Google Drive is actually, it is relatively a small cost. However, when you are thinking about organizations of hundreds of people, if they're all doing that, it adds up. So anything you can do to influence them to tidy up, because otherwise it's costing the money, it's a really good motivator.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good approach, because if you can sort of subtly encourage your users and customers to adopt great data practices just by default, it just makes life so much easier, doesn't it? But that brings me to we had a discussion around the ethical hacker, and you talked about the tools that you use to assist to see what's happening with linked data. I think if you could go through some of those, Neil, I think that would be useful.
Yeah, sure. And I guess that caveat is still in place, which is other cloud providers are available. We are currently running Link on Azure, so the Microsoft Azure platform, and they provide by default a series of tools that allow you to monitor your infrastructure and take actions against your infrastructure without needing an external individual to do a penetration test, that kind of thing. So they've implemented. You probably heard of Microsoft Defender. It's on most Microsoft hardware that you buy. Within Azure, there's Azure Defender, which is a level up, and it's effectively doing real-time monitoring of your environment. So it gives you green ticks on things that you pass. It will check to make sure that your guest users have to use multi-factor authentication to access the organization. It will do checks around your private keys and whether they're encrypted. It will tell you whether your data is encrypted at rest. It will monitor access into your infrastructure from IPs and puts a series of the standard blocks in place, from a virus perspective, from a denial of service perspective, those common attacks that happen to bring infrastructure down. And it's right there. It's human readable. It's easy to understand the action that you should take to turn a red or orange or red tick into a green tick. So it effectively is providing you that real-time security environment that you can monitor through a dashboard. And as long as you are then developing your product against a pattern that is supported by these tools, you can very quickly assure yourself that for all intents and purposes, you've got a well security defined boundary to your users. So we place quite a lot of reliance on those tools. I think the alternative is you have an external penetration test, which is an organization that's certified to be able to effectively try and hack into your environment, and they give you a report and talk about all of your vulnerabilities. The Azure tools are to some degree doing that in real time all of the time. So we spend a good amount of time as we put new capabilities into the platform, especially as we move into looking at AI. It has the potential of opening up lots of other ways for people to get into the business, and so the Defender dashboard helps us monitor that as you put new capability in test. So by the time you're deploying into your production environment, you've considered all of those things as part of that new development.
And again, it's keeping your eye on the dashboard, isn't it? Making sure your Brave security policy product manager or you are actually fully engaged with the Defender tool, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And you can't take your eye off it.
I think this is the interesting thing about all of this, Alison, is eventually you have to trust somebody.
Yes.
Right. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do and how. Eventually, somebody has the password. That means they can access the environment, and if they want to, they can make changes. So eventually, you have to trust somebody, and it doesn't matter what technology is in place. You still are reliant on an individual or some individuals inside your organization doing the right thing. And so that's just a different thing of, please don't write your password on a post-it note and stick it under your keyboard. It's kind of all we've done is move the technology associated with that. Please don't, to a different space. And so you do rely on people doing the right thing, and so the trust inside the organization has to be high, and people need to be professional, and you need to guard against the rogue employee who, if they have access to everything, could, if they want to, when they leave, could take your organization down, quite literally.
That was what we did a study with Australia years ago, and found like most fraud was like 60 to 80% of fraud was somebody from within the organization, not somebody external. We worry about infiltration coming into our organization, but sometimes the person who's creating us problems is actually within our organization. And it reminds me of we used to work with an organization when I was a GM of operations, and they used to send like a guy who was dressed as the water cooler guy. So he'd be wearing like a blue jumpsuit and look pretty innocuous, and he'd turn up with a water cooler bottle. And we used to have bets on how far into the organisation he could get. And as he went through, he was looking out for the post-it notes on people's desks where they'd written the passwords and everything. And there's one time where he actually got into the server room with the water bottle, and he's like, what? What was anybody thinking? We've now moved from data security to physical security, but yes, absolutely. And that, I think that brings us nicely to a Maori proverb, which is, what is the most important thing? It is people, it is people, it is people. Ha tangata, ha tangata, ha tangata. And I think that might be a good place for us to end our conversation and pass back to Ian to see if there's any questions in the chat.
Thank you very much. That was great discussion of all those 5 key practices. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, and no particular order, but the first one that I'll go with is whether there's a paradox on data safety, as in the more protection or investment you put in, the safer you'll be. And the question is, why are we spending so much when we've never been hacked or attacked? So, how do you avoid the paradox, and how do you avoid losing that investment?
I think certainly we used to draw a triangle of accessibility and security and availability. And the more security you put in place, the less accessible your system is. And it's hard to make the system available. So I think there's certainly a paradox in there. And we talked about endpoint security. And if you put in endpoint security, you're going to you're going to lose some transactions from people who should be accessing your system. You know, you're making it safe, but you're probably also losing some interaction.
Well, you can be so secure you can lock yourself out, as we
You
found.
can.
We were recently implementing Microsoft's new policy around multi-factor authentication for people inside the organization and guests, and you can lock yourself out. You can be the owner of the infrastructure, you can be the administrator, and you can set permissions to a level that so that it's possible to overdo it. But the conversation I would go around this paradox of I've never been hacked, so why would I invest?
Yes.
The simple thing is, well, what about banking? Or would you follow the same principle with your own online banking? Like no one's ever got into my bank account online, and therefore I don't need a password, because the reality is the impact when somebody does is so significant, that it can, as you said at the beginning, Alison, organizations don't recover. And so that's the ultimate risk that you're facing. And so, what's the cost? What's the appropriate spend to mitigate that level of risk? And the risk of it happening is low, but the impact, if it did happen, is exceptionally high. And therefore, I think on your risk register, it's probably high enough that it warrants some upfront investment to ensure it doesn't happen.
I would also question whether you are being infiltrated, because I know I've had this conversation with organisations in Wellington where they didn't believe they had been hacked, but a search of their systems found some nascent malware that was ready to trigger at any time. So I think just because you're not seeing any symptoms doesn't mean there isn't anything, and I would certainly be over vigilant rather than under vigilant in this area.
However, at the same time, I think we are in a state at the moment where there is a fear, and that's driving requirements. We find it ourselves when we want to supply into governments. They take a security posture which is almost the highest level of security you could possibly ask for. They don't necessarily understand what they're asking for. They've heard it somewhere. They think it's a good idea. So they've heard the acronym SOC 2. So suddenly you get a bunch of questions around, are you SOC 2 compliant? There's no context. They're not considering the difference between your application and something else. Is it mission critical? Does it have personally identifiable information, etc., etc.? Will my business stop if this content is not available? And yet they're asking for everything, and that absolutely puts people off. And I think there is a balance that's needed, where people understand the impact of what they are asking for, and as a vendor, if we are to deliver all of that capability and be able to tick all of those boxes, and we have a thing called the 105 in New Zealand, which is 105 security questions that are asked for a public cloud service to be consumed by a government agency, and every agency asks it. You don't submit it once and then that's it done for New Zealand government. Every single agency you want to work with asks it. It takes a phenomenal amount of time to tweak it to the individual requirement, and I do wonder whether there is somebody who's expert enough in the background doing the assessment that understands the connection between your software and what it provides and what they're asking. So the flip side of this conversation is, sometimes too much is asked for. That puts people off, and then they don't do the work, and that's probably worse. So
and I think day to day we make decisions as individuals as to who we share our data with. And it's a transaction, isn't it? Like, I was just thinking, I have a supermarket store card that I swipe and I get Qantas points. But I know that it's tracking everything I buy, and it kind of knows what my shopping trolley is. But I'm very happy for it to know that. Like, to me, it's not like highly secure, confidential information. And the benefit of getting the Qantas points is worth entering into that transaction. So
Yeah.
I think what you're saying, Neil, is it's understanding the risk around what you're doing with the data, and what's the appropriate level of security and questioning before you decide, what action to take. Don't assume everything
Absolutely.
is high security.
Yeah.
Good, Ian.
Thank you.
Does
I mean,
that
I thought
answer-
it was very good. I mean, I really like the particular analogy, making it a personal kind of question. That seems pretty effective in a way of helping people to get onto the register and talk about those different levels of investment against protection. And sometimes it may not be, where would you audit yourself, where would you stick yourself, might be a good way of thinking about precisely what's required. We have one other question. The person who posted it has unfortunately had to leave for a different meeting, but they said that they were an MSc student researching digital divide, focusing on UK charities, and wondered if you had any thoughts on how digital twins may help non-profits or the digitally excluded.
So I'll let Neil answer that, but before he does, I'll just say that I work in Papua New Guinea, and one of the one of my expectations, because there's a lot of talk about the digital divide in New Zealand, was that there'd be this massive digital divide between the people who could use digital systems and the people who couldn't or hadn't seen them. And my discovery was that just about everybody in PNG has a smartphone and can use Facebook and is well equipped for using digital systems. You can go into the most remote jungle in Papua New Guinea and you can find a hut with a hole in the roof cut out where the solar panel is for charging the smartphone. Do you know what I mean? Like it's ubiquitous. So everything we design in the judiciary, we design for the usability of accessibility of Facebook. We don't design it to look like Facebook, but we use icons and stuff. And so I haven't really come across the digital divide in that sense, but I think where there is a genuine digital divide, I think maybe a digital twin is quite a good way of warming people up to using digital. So Neil, do you want to talk a bit about digital twins?
Yeah, well, and also a different perspective on the digital divide. So one of the pieces of work we have done in the past in New Zealand is around the accessibility of services for people that need it. So support through education, support in job seeking, this kind of thing. And the digital divide is really you can see it when you expect everybody to have the same access to the internet or to applications or knowledge in order to complete a process to receive some benefit that they're entitled to. And so that digital divide exists everywhere, and we try to break it down by putting internet connected PCs in libraries so people can go in and do them and this kind of thing. But the other approach, I think, is if we design processes which have that perspective of we understand that there is a digital divide, or that there is we're trying to create some equity in terms of accessibility of the service, and charities are ideally placed to support this. Where a digital twin of the organization, because we're specifically doing that, where that can help is that modeling of this is the process today. These are the inputs that it requires to be successful. These are the outputs. This is the effort required. These are the resources required. This is the time that it takes. This is where we expect the participant, whoever that is, to interact with our process. And by building that model out, you get to fully understand maybe where you are forcing people to do things that are not natural to them, not easy for them. And then you can adjust that process by having that visibility and understanding those different perspectives of usage, and where the customer intersects with your organization, that kind of thing. So I'd be super keen to have a conversation, because like I say, I think charities are the ideal place to kind of break open this perception that everybody has equitable access to things and equitable knowledge, and that isn't the case, and we can definitely, you know, expose where the opportunities are to do things differently, and maybe the different channels that you might need for communication with different types of individuals within our societies. So it's a great question, and I could probably talk about it for an hour on its own easily.
And I think, you know, as you say, one of the sort of digital divide questions is around the connectivity, and that was one of the first things we did in PNG, was actually put in unlimited data access at all our courthouses. And then as soon as you put kiosks in, you can deal with another set of people. But again, modeling it and then working out, because there's always that 80-20 rule. There's always 20% of the people who, you know, whatever you do, that they're kind of left out. And actually, if you can identify them and put some process in place for them, and then you can use your digital twin to model what difference would it make if we put this in place, you know, rather than actually spend money investing in developing the solution. Sorry, Ian.
No, it was just saying that BCS does have a digital divide specialist group, which has meetings. I've seen one of the meetings when they made sure they had a list on a piece of paper, so people who were effectively digitally excluded weren't confident enough to use smartphones were able to still access the event. And I have seen some really good discussions within the business analysis community by Adrian Reed, who's another BCS author, talking about designing for inclusion. You know, trying to weed out, you know, rather than designing for the 99%, think about those 1% cases and how do they feature. And I think perhaps that's part of the design approach, the user experience approach that you suggested, which is where digital twins could be useful. I'm not saying I understand completely what a digital twin would look like for an organization or a charity, but it's kind of interesting to think about it and think about how we can use systems to help model an improvement to the future. I don't have any other questions at the moment on the chat. Thank you very much for both getting to those ones. I think that the key one from my perspective is what's the first step that anybody should take if they want to help their organization to be a bit more data safe?
I think I would start by just running that audit of what you have in place. And as Neil was saying, like, just, you know, once you know what your data is, you can start to understand what's appropriate. And I think it's doing the appropriate thing for what you're collecting and what you're doing. I think when you're building a business as an IT person, like we often like start off with like a software idea or something, and it goes from being something that's running on, you know, running in the garage to suddenly being a viable business. But we don't always catch up with all our policy and all the things around the governance around actually putting the protections in place. And I think so the whole data safe is part of that whole, you know, that step in the organizational development, just stepping back and looking who are our customers, who are our users, what data are we collecting, what should we be collecting. I think it's that big sort of step back and take a look would be my first thing.
So mine would be stop and take stock of the purpose of the content that you have inside the organization. So connect your data to business outcomes, because when you do that, you will understand the utility that your data, your information has inside the organization. Once you put a value on it, you will very quickly start thinking about the risk if anything happened to that data, and then go and ask for some help, because there's lots of help out there for individuals and organizations that can very quickly run audits for you and create policy and start to provide education for implementation of data and information governance inside an organization. So I think without doing that first step of acknowledging that information is an asset, data is an asset, and it's vital to the organization. You kind of, once you do that, you will almost scare yourself into wanting to do the next bit to protect it. Yeah.
I think that was the reason for starting for the Heathrow example back in March, because like they lost power, but it was the lack of data that stopped the planes flying. That they didn't have the data to run an airport. They had to switch the airport off, and the impact of that was huge. And as Neil said, like if you understand the value of your data, then you're going to put in place the protection and the mechanisms to make sure that your mission critical data or your valuable data is protected in a way that's appropriate.
Smashing. I mean, I think that's a really good start for anybody to think about, making sure they know where their data is and how well protected it is compared to what it needs to be. So thank you for that. So thank you very much, Alison. Thank you very much, Neil. It's been a great discussion of those 5 key practices. As I said, this will be available as a recording online shortly, and we will try to basically email everybody once we get there. Obviously, we're talking about Data Safe, and that's a BCS Library exclusive written by Alison. That's on the BCS Library, where you can see more through this link, and I will just drop the link into the chat as well for anybody who wants to click through on that. And that does, relate to sort of a subset of data governance, which is a book which is also available through the BCS bookshop as well. BCS members get a discount on anything through the BCS bookshop, and obviously the BCS library has a special member price attached to it as well. So before we go, I'd just like to thank once again Alison Holt and Neil Calvert for presenting, and thank everybody for attending and for your questions, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Alison.
Bye.
Cheers.